If I have to choose one and only one attitude that shifted my view to the world, it would be compassion. Hey everyone! In today's episode of Life's Multiverse, we're going to uncover the layers of this virtue, its effects on our relationships, mental health, and even physical well-being, and how a heart full of compassion can truly be the lens towards a more fulfilling and understanding world. And to begin, let's first define what is compassion, and what is the difference between compassion and empathy, and how they link together. Because empathy is a very determining factor of compassion itself, but they are not quite the same. Empathy is our ability to feel or understand what other person is experiencing from within. It's like stepping into someone's shoes, not just to see what they see, but to feel what they feel. It's also interesting to note that empathy is something you can measure. The measurement is called empathic accuracy, which is pretty interesting, and you can do this yourself. You can search for something like reading the mind in the eyes, which is also called RMET test, which I will add a link to in the description of this episode. It basically works by showing you photos of people's eyes, and in each photo the person is experiencing a certain state of mind or emotion, like fear, jealousy, happiness, or something else. And you have to guess, what is this person thinking or feeling? Although this test is a very interesting way to measure something called social intelligence, and it provides you with an idea on how strong your sense of empathy can be, it cannot tell if you have compassion or not. Because, for example, I myself knew that I have high level of empathy, and I also scored relatively high on this test. But I found out later that I really lack compassion. So let's define compassion here. Compassion takes empathy a step further. It's not just understanding or sharing the feelings of others, it's also being moved to help or alleviate their suffering. Compassion combines an emotional response with a desire to act. So it's empathy with action. And it pushes us to take a positive action like providing support or showing kindness. And this is compassion. Imagine seeing a friend going through a hard time. While empathy allows to share their pain and understand their hardship, compassion drives you to offer support, whether it's a listening ear or practical help. The good news is that if you have a high social intelligence presented by empathy, it will give you a significant advantage on your way to learn compassion and to be more compassionate. But first, let's start with a simple question. Why should we sprinkle a little bit of compassion into our daily life? Why is it that important? And what are the benefits from it? Stay with me here because you will be surprised, as I was when I found out about that. The concept of compassion is actually closely related to the coherent state of the heart, which we explained in details in one of the previous episodes. As the state of compassion manifests not just emotionally, but physically in our bodies. Heart-brain coherence refers to the harmonious state where our heart rate variability is elevated, indicating a balanced and coherent cardiovascular system. This state is often associated with positive emotions and overall well-being. And when we experience genuine compassion, our heart rate variability increases. This means that our heart can synchronize with our breath and our autonomous nervous system, creating a rhythm that promotes a state of calm and balance. It's a psychological reflection of the emotional state of compassion, which originates from love, courage, and peace, and all the other positive emotional states. And as we mentioned also in our previous episode, the experiment when holding a loved one's hand while being exposed to a pain where it was represented by an electrical shock It reduced the actual pain sensation in the subjects. And the reduction was highly correlated with the level of closeness with the people they are holding their hands. I experienced this exact same results myself. When I had an injury and my partner was supporting me with high compassion, which made the recovery journey a lot easier. And I'm sure you all been through such times where some close people stood by your side and made it a lot easier for you to recover from your struggle. So the effect of compassion is not only emotional support, but it has a tangible physical benefits. And in a similar context, another experiment was done on a group of people where throughout 1 month they reported every day if they hugged someone on that day or not. And at the end of the month, they gave all participants shots of a flu virus in their nose and put them in a quarantine immediately. Then observed which participants actually caught the virus and got sick. The observation was that the people who received at least a hug every single day were significantly less likely to get sick from the virus. So think about the last time you shared a hug with someone. It's not just a comforting gesture, it's a boost to your immune system, a testament to the power of human touch and connection. And this is actually an effect of compassion. So you might ask yourself, how does compassion physically look like? Like, how does a compassionate person look like? And I have an answer for you. As a result, from some experiments were done where a group of people were shown videotapes from romantic couples where the first partner was describing a tough day and complaining about hard times they're having, while the other partner is listening. The participants of this study were asked to rate the partner's compassion based on the video they saw. And the finding was that body language played a major role in the perceived compassion, especially having an open body language, leaning slightly forward towards the other person. It's like saying, "I'm here for you." And eye contact is another powerful tool, conveyed empathy and understanding. But the one thing that was found not to indicate compassion was showing a pity face. So pity face was not perceived as compassionate. And that's actually interesting. And now let's find out how this emotion works on the biological level. Research using brain imaging shows that compassion, thoughts, and actions stimulate areas of our brain linked to empathy and understanding of others. It also increases, as we mentioned, the HRV, signaling a state of calm, and triggers the release of oxytocin, which is a very important hormone in compassion. It's often called the love hormone, which is released during compassionate interactions like hugging or comforting someone. Oxytocin fosters feelings of connection, trust, and social bonding. It's not just about romantic love. Oxytocin strengthens all forms of social bonds. And from an evolutionary standpoint, compassion likely developed as a survival mechanism, encouraging cooperative behaviors and strengthening community bonds. And as an example of the profound social impact of compassion, I have one from Kelly's McGonigal book, The Science of Compassion, which is a great book on this subject, by the way. The study was conducted by psychologists at the University of British Columbia. 73 adults could be diagnosed with high blood pressure were given $40 a week for 3 weeks. Some of them were told to spend the money on themselves any way they want, and others were asked to spend the money on other people again any way they want. And at the end of 3 weeks, the people spending money on themselves showed no change in blood pressure, but the people spending money on others showed a significant decrease of blood pressure. And remarkably, this change was comparable to the benefit of blood pressure medication and physical exercise. But as we're talking about all these benefits of compassion, you might ask yourself, Why doesn't then everybody practice this trait? And why it's not something automatic in our behavior? Why we don't see it everywhere? And many people around us seem to be doing the exact opposite of compassion. These are all deep and valid questions. And I found one answer, which you may even reflect on yourself, as I did myself, when I was questioning why wasn't I accustomed to compassion before. And this answer comes from a psychologist, Paul Gilbert. Paul Gilbert developed the fear of compassion scale. And it's a measurement for the resistance to compassion in 3 forms: feeling compassion for others, receiving compassion from others, and offering it to oneself. And if you are curious to know whether you have these fears yourself, you can take the tests inspired by Gilbert's work, and I will add the link to the description. The questions revolve around beliefs that you might have that limit your ability to practice compassion. And I can give you some examples of these thoughts right now where you could try to reflect whether you have it or not. Does this thought represent you? Thinking that people will take advantage of me if I'm too compassionate. Some people in life don't deserve compassion. People need to help themselves. I worry if people find out something about me, they could change their mind. People are only kind and compassionate if they want something from me. I feel that I don't deserve to be compassionate to myself. If I am compassionate, vulnerable people will be drawn to me, and it will be overwhelming. Think of these for a second. And if you answered yes to any of these questions, you are not alone. Gilbert noticed that people who report high levels of shame, as well as those who have experienced some kind of trauma in their lives, many of them seem to have a very strong resistance to compassion. They are afraid of compassion in every form, and in many cases, their past experiences had taught them that it was not always safe to trust others. Or if they ask for help, they would be rejected. And it makes perfect sense. If you experience difficult traumas in your life, the vulnerability of compassion would feel unsafe. Understanding the fears of compassion is a vital step towards embracing it fully. And the first simple step is just the awareness that we have them. And if we are willing to change that, the most efficient way to do it is to deal with our fears with compassion. And we'll mention other ways that could help us to overcome these fears at the end of the episode. And while the fears of compassion can significantly limit our ability to show compassion, there are other often unnoticed barriers that can also hinder our empathetic responses that I'm pretty sure you can also relate on at least one, as I mentioned. Our common barrier is the projection of our own struggles into conversations. We might inadvertently shift focus to our experiences, drawing attention away from the person in need of empathy and understanding. In fact, I found out that I fell for this trap myself, but I didn't feel it at the time until I experienced it on me when I was talking about a struggle that I had, and it was at that time a financial struggle. And the person I was talking to started crying. But it wasn't for the reason you might think of. It was actually because they realized that their financial struggle is worse than mine. And you might guess that at this moment, I didn't feel that great. But I'm not here blaming that person for this reaction, because now I fully understand the reasons behind of it. And it might be an automatic response by anyone, driven by multiple factors in our behavior. Also because, as I mentioned, I did that myself too. And this reaction comes usually from personal perception. If you have checked our previous episode, it was all about that. And we discussed in details how pride, when it turns into vanity, could have such an attitude and effect on our behavior. And in our current context, when we project our struggles into the conversation, we turn this into a comparison which comes out of vanity. When we think that our suffering is worse than your suffering, and my struggle is bigger than your struggle. And this way of thinking is very ego-centered, which has its reasons, of course, that might also go all the way to the childhood. And again, the first step towards solving this is to be mindful and aware. Try to put effort to not project your own struggles into the conversation, even if you had similar struggles. Keep it away for a while and focus on the person in front of you by practicing active listening. And be careful also to not fall for the second barrier, which is jumping to solve their problem, where you might guess it might come from the same previous problem. Actually, people reported that they don't feel compassion when the other person jumps to solve their problem, because it often comes with their sense of superiority, which makes them feel incapable and lack what it takes to solve it themselves. But what they actually need is just genuine compassion. And maybe the hardest form of compassion is compassion towards people who harmed us, or compassion towards our enemies. But in fact, this is the most rewarding kind of compassion. And people who could do that, it means that they are in a great peace with themselves. They are living in a state of heart coherence, and they most likely immune and free from any mental illness. But here I have a very important note for you. It's crucial to mention that chasing compassion just for the benefits is never a good idea, because we actually won't get these benefits if we practice compassion just for the sake of physical health or mental health. Compassion should be genuine because we can't trick our hearts. And that was shown in multiple experiments on voluntary work where people were asked about their motivation, and it highly correlated with their HRV improvement and all the benefits we mentioned if they practiced it genuinely for the sake of compassion or if they were pursuing other benefits. And speaking about compassion, we must mention one thing here that is also what's called self-compassion. Self-compassion is another face of compassion, but it was actually found that compassion towards others and self-compassion are two different things. In fact, the relation is not very close, and it's possible to be highly self-critical while having compassion towards others. And the opposite is also true. But self-compassion is also very critical for our well-being, and we might dedicate another episode for that in the future. But now, as we talked about the compassion towards others and we discovered the fears and barriers that limit our ability to show this compassion, we might have a sense on why it's hard and rare to find pure, genuine compassion around us. But the good news is, there are ways and methods to foster and strengthen this very valuable trait. And we will discuss now what can we do to have more and better compassion towards the others. And the very first way to do that is self-reflection and mindfulness. Begin with self-reflection. Use mindfulness to become aware of your emotional responses and the barriers you might have towards showing compassion. Also, practicing active listening is a very powerful tool to strengthen compassion, and it means hearing truly what someone is saying without planning your responses or judgment. It's about being fully present in the conversation. Also, there are multiple empathy exercises which you can try by putting yourself in someone else's shoes and imagining their feelings and perspective. This can help building a deeper understanding and connection with others. And another very powerful method is practicing small acts of kindness. Don't underestimate small acts of kindness. A smile, a kind word, or offering assistance can be simple yet powerful ways to show compassion. And one of the most impactful ways to practice compassion is volunteering. Consider volunteering or getting involved in community initiatives. These activities not only help others, but also immerse you in experiences that can naturally foster compassion. And finally, the continuous learning and education. Reading books, attending workshops, or listening to talks that inspire and inform you about the power of compassion can always be a great tool. So now, as we come to the end of this episode, I hope you enjoyed this journey. And remember that fostering compassion is not just a noble pursuit, but a journey towards personal growth. Each act of kindness, each moment of understanding, and each gesture of empathy adds a thread to the fabric of our shared humanity. I encourage you to take one small step towards compassion today. Be kind, give a listening ear, or have a moment of self-reflection. These small acts can ripple outwards, bringing more light and warmth into the world. Also, don't forget to share this episode with anyone that might benefit from it. And see you in the next one.